Galaxy 666 by Peltora. Session 12.
Chapter 5. Korzak and Ishklaw blasted off in a little four-man stratocruiser that was the neatest, the sweetest, and the most up-to-date piece of space machinery that the combined technological resources of the Empire had yet produced. She had the rather corny name of Space Greyhound, but that was the only thing about her that was corny. She could nip in and out of the warp like a high-speed sewing machine making nylon dresses. She could dive through hyperspace with considerably more ease and grace than a seal back on far-distant Earth could dive through the water for the amusement of patrons in the big marine zoos and aquariums. There was a little matter of armory and equipment in general, and she was as well provided with teeth as she was with legs. If it was a question of survival of the fittest, then the little four-man spacecraft had every chance of surviving. Besides the two problem experts and all their observational and recording gear, she carried with her a number of warp transmission data capsules, a captain who was also a navigator, and an engineer who was also a construction expert and general all-around factotum. They blasted clear of their own gravitational fields, turned off the rocket drive, and dived through hyperspace, went through the warp like a streak of the proverbial grease lightning, and belched out again just beside the rim of Galaxy 666. It was a strange sight. Korzak had seen plenty of galaxies from the outside. For that matter, so had Ishklaw. Despite their youth, both the problem experts had been around quite a lot. The captain of the Space Greyhound, who rejoiced in the name Bronet, had also seen far more than his fair share of space for one so young. The other crewman, Oski, had been around just as much. There was great similarity between the four men, for space and general conditions of life in the Empire had tended to accelerate the natural trend of regression toward the mean. One young, intelligent, lightly bronzed spaceman, engineer, or technician of the Empire was very much like another. Most of the humanoids in the Empire were of terrestrial extract originally, but it was so long ago and far away that very few could trace their lineage back. Those who could were the real old aristocrats of space. Most others were mongrel humanoids. They had intermarried and interbred with humanoid races on other planets in their own galaxy and beyond. Every ethnic barrier had been broken down. Every racial fence had been torn aside. They were humanoids, and they were citizens of the Empire, and that was all that mattered. Gradually, the extremely dark races and the extremely light races had tended to disappear. Everybody was a genial sort of mid-brown, a happy biscuit, what would have been called Levantine, or Mediterranean tan, long ago and far away on distant Earth. The pure black races and the pure white races were only memories. And although there were certain factors which some historians felt might have been used as an argument for the preservation of distinct racial characteristics, the social reformers, the politicians, and commercial men in general decreed and rejoiced in the fact that the old ethnic groups had gone forever. A pride in distinctiveness is a perfectly legitimate and good thing, but when that pride in distinctiveness becomes a pride in superiority, then the door is open for all kinds of ignorant prejudice and the stupidity and tragedy of what had been once known as racial discrimination. The nearest of the stars in Galaxy 666 loomed huge and clear on the computer.
"Remember what my grandfather was telling me not long back,"
said Korzak. "What, old Bion?" asked Ishklaw.
"Yes, old Bion and Milka. Bion has been there, you know, so he claims. He is one of the thousands who have contributed contradictory data in good faith to our poor old computer."
Ishklaw laughed.
"Bion's a good man. I know him well,"
said Bronet.
"He was just retiring when I first joined. I think actually he'd fixed up his birth certificate, but nobody ever squealed on him. He was the kind of man you enjoyed sailing with." "I know old Milka well,"
put in Oski.
"He was a good spaceman, too."
"They were good spacemen,"
added Korzak.
"Good veterans. Even my own grandfather, and I say it when I shouldn't, is a fine old man."
"If you got Bion's blood running in your veins, boy, you'll make out well,"
said Bronet.
"Thanks,"
replied Korzak.
"That's funny,"
said Oski suddenly.
"What's the matter?"
asked Korzak sharply.
"Look at that auto-navigator."
The pointer on the auto-navigator was flashing insanely from one end of the scale to the other. It was registering utter and absolute opposites by turn.
"Something must have shorted the director beam,"
said Bronet.
"I'll check it,"
grunted Oski. He came back.
"The director beam's perfect,"
he announced.
"Well, I'm hanged,"
said Bronet. He turned the auto-astrogator off and gave it a couple of seconds to cool down, and turned it on again. It steadied a little, then began its wild swinging once more, with what could only be described as increased enthusiasm.
"Here's something up your street if you're problem experts,"
said Bronit. Ishklaw and Korzak were already poring over the mutinous astronavigator, the auto-astrogator.
"What the devil has gotten into the thing?"
said Korzak.
"Right, let's run some quick checks,"
replied Ishklaw.
"Have you looked at the cathode ray tube for any signs of aberration?"
"Check," said Ishklaw. "None."
"Very odd," said Korzak. "Any abnormal glow discharge?"
"Slight one. The working voltage is increasing as the current increases." "Give me that ergometer," said Ishklaw suddenly. He ran the ergometer over the power output. "Reading normally. What's the attenuation constant?"
"Standing steady, 4 above 0,
said Korzak. "Is the transducer separating the waves okay?" asked Ishklaw.
"As far as I can see."
"The trigger tube satisfactory?"
"Trigger tube perfect."
"Monoscope?"
"Okay."
"What about the intermediate anode?"
"Intermediate anode is fair."
"How about the dielectric?"
"That's all right."
"Is the capacitor in?"
"Yep, capacitor's fine."
"Check for fluorescence."
"None."
"It's not that, then. Is the transition temperature up to normal?"
"Transition temperature's fine."
"Any transistors gone?" Korzak was checking rapidly.
"None that I can see."
"Is that rheostat free to function?"
"Running free."
"See if the ripple filter is all right." Korzak unscrewed the top of the ripple filter holder.
"Nothing that I can see."
"See if the extrinsic semiconductor's functioning,"
suggested Oski. "The surface conductivity's a bit high," interrupted Ishklaw.
"The waveguide is moving a little along its axis,"
said Korzak suddenly.
"That in itself isn't a fatal error. Look at that oscillator,"
said Captain Bronit. They looked. It was a phase shift oscillator, and it employed resistance and capacitance in a bridge circuit to control the frequencies.
"The thermogenic valve is gone at the bottom now,"
said Oski.
"The whole thing's breaking down."
"It wouldn't have," said Ishklaw. "If it hadn't been for this abnormal signal it was picking up. I mean, this is the equivalent of hitting it with a hammer. Look at that blasted pointer." There was a final dismal splutter as the two relays packed up. A dead short followed, and the fuse leaped out of its socket like a pip squeezed from an orange.
"So much for the auto-astrogator,"
grunted Bronit.
"Now what?"
said Oski interrogatively.
"Now we go in on manual and hope for the best,"
replied Bronit.
"It's being cheerful that keeps us all going,"
laughed Oski. But his laugh didn't have a lot of humor in it.
Here ends Session 12.